The sky above the human colony of Elysium was a calm blue, the kind of day that made the settlers feel safe. Elysium was a peaceful world, far away from the wars and conflicts of the galaxy. Life here was simple, but it was thriving. The colony's leader, Commander Area Kane, had spent years overseeing the development of the city, watching it grow from a small outpost into a bustling hub of human progress. The people here were proud of what they had built: peaceful farms, strong communities, and a growing sense of unity. But that calmness would not last long. It began with a sudden disturbance in the skies. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker on the radar, a brief blip that passed unnoticed. Area was in her command center, reviewing a report on the colony's energy output, when the first alarm sounded. The blip had turned into a large, fast-moving object heading straight for Elysium. "What is that?" Area muttered, leaning over the radar display. Her eyes widened as the object grew larger, its shape becoming clearer. It wasn't one ship. It was a fleet. A huge fleet, larger than anything the colony had ever seen. The ships were sleek, dark, and terrifyingly advanced. Their technology was unlike anything the humans had, and it sent a wave of fear through Area's chest. This was no ordinary attack. This was a calculated assault, one that could crush their colony in a matter of hours. Area quickly activated the colony's defense systems, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. The human technology on Elysium was still in its infancy compared to what these aliens could bring. It was too late to evacuate the city, too late to call for backup from Earth. The alien fleet was already too close, hovering just above the horizon. In the command center, Area's voice was steady but filled with urgency. "Prepare for an attack. Mobilize all defense units. Activate the Nova Shield." The Nova Shield was the colony's last line of defense, an energy barrier designed to protect the city from a direct strike. It was experimental, untested in real combat, but it was the only chance they had. Outside, the citizens of Elysium had no idea what was coming. Some were in the markets, others were in their homes, enjoying a peaceful afternoon. But within minutes, the warning sirens blared, signaling the arrival of the alien fleet. The calm was shattered, and chaos spread through the streets. People rushed to their shelters, but many were confused. They had never seen anything like this before. No one knew who these aliens were or why they were attacking. Back in the command center, Area paced back and forth, her mind racing. She had led the colony through difficult times before, but nothing like this. The aliens were advanced and ruthless. They had come from a distant corner of the galaxy, and their intentions were clear. They wanted to conquer. The first wave of attack came within minutes. The sky darkened as the alien ships unleashed their devastating weapons on the outer perimeter of the colony. Explosions rocked the ground, sending shockwaves through the streets. The Nova Shield flickered on, but it couldn't hold forever. The aliens were powerful, and their weapons were unlike anything the humans had ever encountered. It was a full-scale siege. "This is it. We have to hold them off long enough to regroup," Area thought, staring at the destruction unfolding before her eyes. The defense systems were struggling. The Nova Shield could only block so much. Within moments, alien forces began landing on the outskirts of the city, and ground forces poured out from the alien ships. It was no longer just an air attack. It was a full invasion. Area quickly ordered her best officers to the front lines. "Get to the outer defenses and activate the countermeasures. We need to slow them down." But even as she issued the orders, a sinking feeling grew in her stomach. This was unlike anything they had ever trained for. The Zorkath, the alien species attacking, were known for their speed and deadly precision. Their ships were equipped with weapons that could destroy entire cities with a single blast. And now, those weapons were aimed directly at Elysium. The first few minutes of the battle were chaos. The human soldiers fought bravely, but their weapons did little against the alien forces. The Zorkath had already set up energy shields that protected them from almost everything. The humans' laser guns bounced off the shields, doing no damage. Arya watched helplessly as her soldiers fell one by one. There was no time to mourn. Every second counted. In the streets, panic spread like wildfire. People were running in all directions, some trying to escape to the shelters, while others fought back with anything they could find. The colony was quickly being overrun, and Arya knew it was only a matter of time before the Zorkath. But Commander Arya wasn't ready to give up. She refused to let her people die without a fight. She had seen humanity face impossible odds before, and she knew they had something the Zorkath didn't understand: resilience. As she stood at the command center, watching the destruction unfold, Arya's mind raced. What could she do? How could they fight back? Then, as if a spark of inspiration ignited within her, she turned to her officers and said, "There's something we haven't tried yet. Prepare to activate the Vanguard cannon." The Vanguard cannon was an experimental weapon developed in secret, never meant to be used unless absolutely necessary. And now, it looked like humanity had no other choice. The first hour of the alien attack had been nothing short of a nightmare. The once peaceful colony of Elysium was now a battlefield. Smoke and fire rose from the outer perimeter, and the ground trembled with every explosion. Commander Arya Kane stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the monitors. The battle was escalating quickly. The Nova Shield, their last hope, was holding up for now, but the Zorkath were relentless. Their assault was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. "We're losing ground," said Lieutenant Sander, one of Arya's most trusted officers. His face was grim as he monitored the defense systems. "The shield's power is draining faster than we can recharge it. We can't keep this up much longer." Arya didn't need to be told twice. She knew the situation was critical. They had to hold their ground or risk losing everything. The Zorkath fleet was relentless, their massive ships hovering over the colony like a storm ready to strike. The humans had never faced such an advanced species, and the odds were stacked heavily against them. "We need to strike back," Arya said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Activate the Vanguard cannon." The Vanguard cannon was a top-secret weapon, still untested in real combat. The cannon was a last-ditch effort, a project that had been in development for years. It harnessed the power of a rare energy source deep within the planet's core, a power strong enough to disrupt the Zorkath's shields and give the humans a fighting chance. But it wasn't fully operational, and no one knew how well it would work under pressure. "Are you sure it's ready, Commander?" asked Sergeant Ellis, a young officer who was still adjusting to the weight of command. "We haven't even run full tests. What if it backfires?" Arya looked at him, her expression unwavering. "We don't have a choice. We either fight back now, or we lose everything." The decision was made. Arya gave the order to fire up the Vanguard cannon, and technicians scrambled to activate the weapon. The large chamber beneath the command center hummed to life as energy levels surged, and the air filled with a strange, vibrating hum. The cannon had never been used in a real-world scenario, but they had no other option. If it worked, it could turn the tide of the battle. If it failed, they would be one step closer to being overrun. Outside, the Zorkath continued their siege. Their ships hovered ominously above the city, and their ground forces were moving closer to the heart of the colony. Alien warriors, taller and stronger than humans, were descending to the surface. Armed with energy blades and plasma rifles, they began to cut through the colony's defenses with ease. Human soldiers fought valiantly, but the odds were overwhelming. In the midst of the chaos, Commander Arya's mind was focused. She knew the battle was only just beginning, and every decision she made would impact the future of the colony. She glanced at the main monitor, where the Vanguard cannon's status was displayed. The cannon was ready. "Fire the Vanguard cannon," Arya commanded. The technicians did their best to remain calm, despite the tension in the air. With a loud mechanical whirring sound, the cannon came to life. A brilliant blue beam of energy shot up from the underground chamber, tearing through the sky toward the alien ships above. The beam was powerful, and it hit one of the Zorkaf ships dead on. For a moment, there was silence. And then, the explosion came. The Zorkaf ship erupted in a brilliant burst of light, its energy shield failing under the power of the Vanguard cannon. The blast was so intense that it sent shockwaves through the entire colony. The explosion illuminated the night sky, and for the briefest moment, it felt like victory was within reach. "We hit them," shouted Xander, his voice full of disbelief. "We actually hit them." But the Zorkath fleet retaliated almost immediately. The remaining ships quickly adapted to the humans' newfound weapon, and they began to fire back with even greater force. The Vanguard cannon had done its job, distracting the Zorkath long enough for the humans to make a stand, but it wasn't enough to win the battle. "They're retaliating," shouted Ellis, his voice shaking. "They'd got more weapons coming at us." Aria's heart raced as she saw the incoming blasts on the screen. The Zorkath weren't just attacking. They were trying to obliterate the colony's defenses entirely. Another round of explosions rocked the outer walls, and the ground beneath them shook violently. "Get the shield back up. We need full power," Aria barked, her eyes scanning the monitors. "All units, fall back to the central compound. Protect the civilians." The human forces scrambled to regroup. Soldiers carried injured comrades to safety, while technicians worked feverishly to keep the defense systems online. The Zorkath, though battered, were still pushing forward with terrifying efficiency. As Aria observed the battlefield from her command center, she realized that the humans had only just begun to understand the full extent of the Zorkath threat. They were fierce, ruthless, and capable of adapting to anything the humans threw at them. The humans' only hope now was to outsmart them, something the Zorkath didn't seem prepared for. But Aria knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The true test of humanity's strength was yet to come, and if they were going to survive, they would need to fight with everything they had. The siege had truly begun. The battle raged on, and the once peaceful human colony of Elysium was now a war zone. The Zorkath forces had established a foothold within the outskirts of the city, and the explosions that filled the air had become an all too familiar sound. The Vanguard cannon had provided a brief moment of hope, but that was all it had been, a fleeting victory. The alien invaders had adapted quickly, and now they were closing in on the heart of the colony. Commander Aria Kane stood in the middle of the command center, watching as the tactical map of the city flickered across the screen. The enemy was advancing with alarming speed. The human soldiers were brave, but they were outmatched by the sheer force of the Zorkath. Their weapons and tactics were superior, and their numbers seemed endless. "We need reinforcements," Aria said, her voice steady, but inside, she was starting to feel the weight of the situation. She glanced at Lieutenant Xander, who was monitoring communications. "Have you received any word from Earth?" Xander shook his head. "Nothing, Commander. The distress signal was sent hours ago, but there's been no response. We're on our own." Aria's heart sank. She had known the risks of settling on an isolated world like Elysium, but she had never expected to be abandoned by Earth in their moment of greatest need. The odds were stacked against them, but one thing kept Aria going, her belief in humanity's will to survive. They might not have the best weapons, the most advanced technology, or the numbers to outmatch the Zorkath, but they had something else, the will to fight. As Aria turned back to the screen, she noticed something troubling. The Zorkath had begun to concentrate their forces near the central compound, the heart of the colony. If they breached that area, they would have control over the entire settlement. The civilians, the families, the children, all of them would be in grave danger. "We can't let that happen," Aria muttered under her breath. She quickly ordered her best soldiers to defend the central compound, and her team of engineers began activating emergency barricades and fortifications. It was a desperate attempt, but it was the only chance they had. The Nova Shield was still active, but it was weakening by the minute. Without the Vanguard cannon's backup, there was little hope of holding the line for much longer. In the streets, the citizens of Elysium had been caught in the crossfire. Those who hadn't managed to reach the shelters were now trying to escape, running through the chaos with no clear direction. Aria knew she had to protect them at all costs. She turned to her second-in-command, Captain Jensen, and gave him a firm order. Take a small team and clear the escape routes. Make sure the civilians are safely. Jensen nodded and swiftly moved out with his team. Meanwhile, Aria's attention remained fixed on the battlefield. The Zorkath were relentless, and their ground forces were closing in. The towering alien warriors, with their jagged armor and glowing eyes, were beginning to swarm the colony's defenses. They were like a tidal wave of destruction, unstoppable and merciless. But amidst the chaos, Aria noticed something odd. The Zorkath were moving with a sense of coordination, almost as if they had a leader directing their movements. Aria had seen this type of behavior before. Alien forces who weren't just fighting, but were executing a well-planned strategy. They're not just attacking randomly. They're planning something, Aria thought, narrowing her eyes. The Zorkath had a reason for everything they did, and this attack wasn't just about conquering a colony. It was part of a larger, more calculated objective. The thought sent a chill down Aria's spine. What were they really after? Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet shook violently. The Zorkath had deployed an underground force to breach the colony's main defenses. Their tunneling ships had been undetected until now, and they were moving quickly beneath the surface, coming up through the lower levels of the colony. The alarms in the command center blared, signaling that the enemy had reached the critical infrastructure. "They've breached the lower levels," shouted Sergeant Ellis, his face pale with fear. "The city's main power grid is exposed." Aria's mind raced. If the power grid was taken out, the entire colony would be left defenseless. The Nova Shield would collapse, and the Zorkath would have free rein to wipe them out. The civilians would have no chance. "We have to stop them." Aria barked, her voice filled with determination. "Get down there and shut them down. Use the underground passages to intercept them." Captain Jensen, who had just returned from securing the escape routes, nodded and quickly assembled a small squad. "We'll take care of it, Commander." As the team rushed to the lower levels, Aria remained behind to coordinate the defense. She wasn't sure how much longer they could hold out, but she knew one thing: humanity would not go down without a fight. Meanwhile, in the underground tunnels, Jensen's team made their way deeper into the colony. The passageways were dimly lit and narrow, but they were the only way to get close to the Zorkath's position without being detected. The sound of alien footsteps echoed through the tunnels, and the team moved with caution, every step filled with the knowledge that they were walking into enemy territory. "Stay sharp," Jensen whispered to his team. "We can't afford any mistakes down here. If we lose the power grid, we lose everything." The tension was palpable as they crept through the tunnels, their weapons ready and their minds focused on the task at hand. The Zorkath were close, too close for comfort. And then, just as they turned a corner, they found themselves face to face with the alien invaders. A group of Zorkath warriors emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes locked onto the human soldiers. It was a standoff. Jensen's team quickly raised their weapons, but the Zorkath didn't move. They simply stood there, watching. The tension in the air was suffocating, but neither side made the first move. The battle for humanity's survival was far from over. But Commander Aria Kane and her soldiers knew one thing for certain: the Zorkath might be powerful, but they had never faced humanity's will to survive. The tension in the tunnels was unbearable. Captain Jensen and his team stood at the ready, weapons aimed at the Zorkath warriors who had emerged from the shadows. The aliens, with their eerie, glowing eyes and jagged armor, were silent but menacing. Their tall frames seemed to dwarf the humans, and the sound of their breathing echoed through the narrow tunnels, sending shivers down Jensen's spine. The Zorkath had been relentless in their siege, but now the humans had the chance to strike back if they could survive the next few minutes. "Hold your ground," Jensen whispered, his voice steady but low, as the soldiers around him tensed. They all knew what was at stake. The fate of the entire colony rested on their shoulders. If the Zorkath breached the power grid, it would be the end of the humans' ability to defend themselves. The Zorkath warriors didn't move at first. Instead, they stood still, sizing up the humans before them. They had no fear, no hesitation. Only the cold, calculated resolve of a species that had conquered countless worlds before. But Jensen knew this. The Zorkath's confidence was their biggest weakness. They underestimated humanity. "They're waiting for us to make the first move," said Sergeant Ellis, his voice low but filled with the same determination that burned in every soldier. Jensen nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We won't give them that satisfaction." Then, without warning, the Zorkath leader, a massive alien adorned with strange, glowing symbols, stepped forward. His armor gleamed in the dim light, and his eyes locked onto Jensen's squad. The alien's voice, when it came, was a deep, rumbling growl that reverberated through the tunnel walls. "Surrender, humans. You cannot stop us." His words echoed with an unshakable confidence that made Jensen's blood boil. The Zorkath had no intention of negotiating. They thought they had already won. But Jensen wasn't about to give in. "We're not surrendering," Jensen said, his voice firm. "We're here to stop you." A moment of silence passed, and then the Zorkath leader bared his teeth, a sign that the aliens had decided to engage. With a swift motion, he signaled his warriors to advance. It was time. "Fire," Jensen ordered. The tunnels erupted in a flurry of activity. The humans fired their weapons with precision, targeting the Zorkath's weak points, the gaps in their armor, and the exposed areas of their joints. The blasts of energy from their guns illuminated the darkness, but the Zorkath were fast. They retaliated with terrifying speed, swinging their energy blades and firing their own plasma rifles. The first clash was brutal. The human soldiers fought with everything they had, but the Zorkath were formidable opponents. Their strength, speed, and advanced weaponry made them almost unbeatable in close combat. Jensen's team moved quickly, using the tight confines of the tunnel to their advantage. But the Zorkath were relentless. Every step forward seemed to be met with a new wave of resistance. Jensen ducked behind a support beam, narrowly avoiding an incoming blast of plasma. The heat from the explosion singed his uniform, but he was too focused on the mission to care. His team was still in the fight, still alive, but that could change in an instant. "Keep pushing forward," he shouted. "We need to get to the power grid and stop them." The team moved as one, pushing through the fierce battle. They knew the stakes. They couldn't afford to fail. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Jensen's thoughts kept returning to the power grid. If they could reach it and shut it down, the Zorkath would lose their edge. The power would be cut, the shields would drop, and the humans would have a chance to fight back in the open. But the further they went, the more dangerous it became. The Zorkath were pushing harder, growing angrier with every step. Their leader, a towering figure of rage, seemed to be everywhere at once, directing his forces with military precision. It was clear that he wasn't just a leader, he was a strategist, capable of outthinking his opponents. As the humans neared the power grid, the intensity of the fight escalated. The tunnels were filling with the scent of burning ozone and the sound of weapons clashing. The ground shook as another explosion tore through the walls, sending debris flying. Jensen could hear the thundering footsteps of Zorkath soldiers advancing from behind, cutting off their retreat. "We're almost there," Jensen gritted through his teeth. "Keep moving." Finally, they reached the central chamber where the power grid was located. The massive glowing core hummed with energy, its power lines connecting to every part of the colony. The Zorkath had already planted explosive charges around the perimeter of the chamber, their glowing symbols etched into the walls as a warning. "Defend the core," Jensen shouted as the last of the squad entered the room. "We can't let them destroy it." But just as they prepared to engage, The Zorkath leader emerged from the shadows, his blade raised high. He was faster than the humans had anticipated, and with a single slash, he cut down one of the soldiers who had been standing guard. The room filled with chaos as the remaining humans tried to retaliate. Jensen gritted his teeth, knowing that this was their last chance. He sprinted forward, his gun raised, and fired a burst of energy at the Zorkath leader. The blast hit its target, but the alien warrior barely flinched. He swung his blade in retaliation, and Jensen barely managed to block the strike with his rifle, the impact sending a shockwave through his body. The fight seemed endless. Jensen knew that if the Zorkath leader wasn't taken down, they had no hope of surviving. He moved to his left, flanking the alien as his team provided cover fire. The Zorkath leader, distracted for just a moment, turned his. That was when Jensen saw his chance. With one final push, he tackled the alien leader, knocking the energy blade from his hands. The two tumbled to the ground in a flurry of fists and kicks. The Zorkath was strong, but Jensen's resolve was stronger. Using his combat training, he managed to land a devastating blow to the alien's throat, cutting off its air supply. As the Zorkath leader struggled for breath, Jensen's team closed in, firing on the remaining aliens and securing the power grid. The fight was far from over, but this small victory felt like a turning point. The humans had proven something to themselves, and to the Zorkath. They weren't going down without a fight. For the first time since the siege began, there was hope. But in the back of Jensen's mind, he knew that the Zorkath would be back, and next time, they would be more prepared. The real battle for the survival of the human colony had only just begun. The Zorkath leader, now defeated, lay motionless on the cold ground of the power grid chamber. Captain Jensen stood over him, his chest heaving with heavy breaths, his body battered but determined. His squad had managed to stop the Zorkath's most dangerous move, but the threat was far from over. They had bought themselves only a brief moment of respite. The Zorkath would retaliate, and when they did, the humans had to be ready. Commander Kane, we've secured the power grid. The Zorkath leader is down, but we've sustained heavy casualties. We need reinforcements and supplies, Jensen reported, his voice steady but strained. Commander Area Kane's voice crackled through the comlink. Copy that, Captain. We've got teams heading your way. Hold your position. We're still securing the rest of the colony's defenses. Jensen looked around the chamber at his team. Several of them were injured, and the room was littered with debris. The battle had taken its toll, but the humans had held their ground. For now, we need to make sure this power grid stays up, Sergeant Ellis said, surveying the room. Without it, we're as good as dead. Jensen nodded. Agreed. Let's get the perimeter secured and ready for the next wave. The team moved quickly, setting up defensive positions around the power grid. The Zorkath had shown that they could adapt, and the humans needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The next few hours would be critical. As Jensen and his squad fortified their position, the rest of the colony was also gearing up for the inevitable counterattack. Area Kane was coordinating with every available unit to bolster the colony's defenses. The Zorkath might have underestimated humanity once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. The humans were resilient. They would fight back, no matter the odds. Outside, the sky was dark, and the faint glow of the colony's energy shields cast an eerie light across the battlefield. The Zorkath forces were regrouping, preparing for their next strike. Their leader was down, but their resolve remained unbroken. The Zorkath were ruthless, and now they would be even more determined to crush the humans. It was only a matter of time before the full force of their army descended upon Elysium. "They're coming," Sergeant Ellis said, his voice tense as he peered through the window of the chamber. "I can see movement, too many to count." Jensen's heart raced. The humans had been able to hold their ground so far, but this was the moment that would decide everything. If they couldn't stop the Zorkath here, the colony would fall, and the humans would be wiped out. "Get ready," Everyone, Jensen said, his voice calm but firm. This is it. We either hold them off, or it's over. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and soon the first wave of Zorkath soldiers appeared in the distance. Their hulking forms loomed ominously as they advanced, their weapons raised, their eyes glowing with malice. But the humans weren't intimidated. They had faced worse. They had fought through the worst of it already. Open fire, Jensen shouted. The air erupted with gunfire as the human soldiers unleashed everything they had. Energy blasts streaked through the air, hitting the Zorkath and sending them sprawling. But the Zorkath were relentless. They pushed forward, using their superior numbers to close in on the human position. Fall back to the secondary perimeter, Jensen called out, realizing they were outnumbered. The humans had to be strategic. They couldn't afford to. His team moved quickly, setting up a fallback position near the colony's central hub. The Zorkath were close, their weapons crackling with energy as they charged. But humanity wasn't going to make it easy for them. They had been underestimated before, and the Zorkath were about to see just how wrong they had been. As the Zorkath forces advanced, Area Kane led a team of reinforcements toward the front lines. They moved quickly, ducking behind cover, their eyes scanning the battlefield. The humans had been caught off guard, but now they were ready for whatever the Zorkath had in store. "Captain, we've got your back." Area's voice came over the comms. "We're moving in from the north." Jensen breathed a sigh of relief as he heard the reinforcements. The humans might not have the numbers, but they had the will. They would hold their ground. The fight for Elysium had become a battle of attrition. The humans had no choice but to stand firm against the overwhelming alien forces. The Zorkath were relentless, their weapons powerful and their tactics brutal. But the humans weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their future, for their families, and for the very existence of their colony. "We need to buy time," Jensen said, his mind racing. "If we can hold them off long enough, the reinforcements from Earth will arrive." The next wave of Zorkath crashed into the humans' defenses, but this time they were ready. The humans fought with everything they had, their weapons blazing and their hearts set on victory. They weren't going to let their colony fall without a fight. With each passing minute, the tide of battle shifted. The Zorkath were pushed back, their relentless assault faltering. The humans were holding their own, and the reinforcements from Earth were arriving. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope. The Zorkath had underestimated the strength of humanity, and that would be their downfall. The humans were not just surviving. They were fighting back. And as long as they had breath in their lungs, they would never give up. But the war was far from over, and the true test was still ahead. The Zorkath would return, and when they did, the humans would be ready. For in the darkest of moments, humanity had proven one undeniable truth. They would always rise. The Zorkath had regrouped, their eyes burning with fury as they prepared for their final assault. The humans had pushed them back once, but now the alien invaders were coming in force, their numbers overwhelming and their resolve unshakable. The battle for the colony had reached its climax. The time had come for the final stand. Captain Jensen stood at the forefront, his team now reinforced by more soldiers from Earth. The human line was stretched thin, but the soldiers were determined. This was their home, and they would not let the Zorkath take it from them. The power grid had been secured, but the enemy was relentless. They wanted more than just victory. They wanted to annihilate the human race, to break them down and leave nothing but ashes in their wake. "We've held them off this long," Jensen said, his voice steady as he addressed his team. "Now we finish this. We fight until the last breath." Sergeant Ellis was already looking through his scope, scanning the battlefield. "They're advancing, Captain. Too many for us to stop with just firepower." Jensen nodded. "We'll do what we can. Every soldier holds the line. We won't let them pass this point." From their position near the central hub of the colony, the humans had a clear view of the approaching enemy. The Zorkath were moving in unison, their weapons poised for a final strike. The battle had taken a toll on the human forces, but there was something in their eyes, something that made them stand firm. They had already lost so much, but they would not let the Zorkath take everything. "They think we're weak," said Sergeant Ellis, his voice laced with defiance. "But they're about to find out how wrong they are." The first wave of Zorkath hit the human defenses with a deafening roar. Energy blasts tore through the air, and the ground shook with the force of their assault. But the humans were ready. They held their position, firing with precision and covering each other as the enemy closed in. The Zorkath soldiers were large and heavily armored, but the humans had something that the aliens could never understand: a burning will to survive. Jensen's mind raced as the battle raged around him. He knew they couldn't hold out forever. The Zorkath were too powerful, and their numbers were far greater. But he had seen the strength of humanity, the way they could fight against impossible odds and never give up. It was a strength the Zorkath. "We need to take out their heavy artillery," Jensen yelled, spotting the enemy's massive energy cannons positioned at the back of their lines. "If we don't, they'll wipe us out from a distance." Sergeant Ellis and a small group of soldiers quickly broke off from the main defense and advanced toward the enemy's artillery. The Zorkath tried to stop them, but the humans were faster, more adaptable. The soldiers moved in tandem, taking down any alien soldiers in their path and reaching the artillery cannons. "On me," Ellis barked. "We can't let them fire again." Jensen's heart pounded as he watched his soldiers race toward the cannons. They were outnumbered, but they had a single mission: to stop the Zorkath from turning their artillery against the humans. The blast from one of the cannons would be enough to wipe out an entire squad, and there was no time to waste. The Zorkath had noticed their movement and opened fire, but Ellis and his team had already reached the first cannon. They worked quickly, planting explosives and preparing to destroy the weapon before it could fire. But the Zorkath were closing in fast. They were relentless, but the humans refused to back down. "Plant the charge," Ellis shouted as he dove behind cover, narrowly avoiding an energy blast. With a final push, the human soldiers activated the charges, and the artillery cannon exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. The Zorkath soldiers screamed in fury, but the humans weren't finished yet. They moved to the next cannon, determined to keep fighting. "One down, 2 to go," Ellis said, his voice full of grit. "We've got this." Meanwhile, Captain Jensen's squad continued to hold their position, firing at the Zorkath with everything they had. But the enemy wasn't backing down. They pressed on, each strike becoming more intense, their fury growing as they neared the heart of the colony. But then something unexpected happened. A strange sound filled the air, a low, humming noise that echoed through the battlefield. For a moment, both the humans and the Zorkath paused, turning their attention to the source. The ground began to tremble as a massive ship descended from the sky, its lights blinking in the distance. "What is that?" Sergeant Ellis whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Reinforcements," Jensen said, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. "We're not alone anymore." The ship landed with a deafening thud, and the hatch opened, revealing more soldiers, Earth's finest, ready for battle. With them came heavy artillery and more advanced weapons, and they quickly joined the fray. The Zorkath were caught off guard. The reinforcements had arrived, and now the tide of the battle was shifting. The humans were no longer fighting alone. They had the strength of their people, the resolve to protect what was theirs, and the support of Earth's finest soldiers. The Zorkath were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. "Push them back," Jensen shouted, rallying his team. "The battle is ours to win." With renewed strength, the humans pushed forward. The Zorkath, once certain of their victory, were now struggling. The final assault was upon them, and it was the humans who were winning. The Zorkath might have been stronger, faster, and more advanced, but they had underestimated the humans. They had underestimated the unyielding strength of humanity's spirit. And now, the Zorkath were about to learn just how wrong they had been. The final victory was within reach, but the cost of it would be steep. The humans had fought to protect their colony, and they would not stop until the Zorkath were driven from their home. This battle, this war, was far from over, but the humans had proven one undeniable truth. They would never give up, no matter the odds. The battlefield was quiet, almost eerily so, as the last of the Zorkath forces retreated into the distance. The sounds of gunfire and explosions had faded into the night, leaving only the hum of the colony's energy shields and the heavy breathing of exhausted soldiers. Captain Jensen surveyed the scene, his eyes scanning the once bustling colony that had now been scared by the war. The humans had won. Against all odds, they had pushed the Zorkath back, and the alien But the victory came at a heavy cost. Jensen's heart sank as he looked over his fallen comrades. Soldiers who had fought bravely, side by side, now lay lifeless among the debris. The ground was littered with weapons, broken armor, and the remnants of fierce battles fought in defense of their home. The humans had given everything to protect their colony, and many had paid the ultimate price. "We did it, Captain." Sergeant Ellis's voice was quiet, filled with both relief and sadness. He stood beside Jensen, gazing at the horizon, where the last of the Zorkath forces had vanished. "Yeah, we did," Jensen replied, his voice rough with exhaustion. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, but also an overwhelming grief for those who had fallen. The victory was theirs, but it had been hard-won. In the distance, the massive Earth reinforcements began to move in, securing the perimeter and taking care of the wounded. Ships hovered overhead, their lights bright against the dark sky as medical teams prepared to tend to the survivors. The Zorkath had underestimated the humans, but now, they knew the true strength of humanity. "What happens now, Captain?" Ellis asked, his gaze shifting back to Jensen. Jensen looked out over the battlefield, his eyes reflecting the weariness of the past few days. "Now, we rebuild. We make sure this never happens again." As the Earth forces continued to assist the survivors, Jensen made his way to the colony's central hub, where Commander Kane was waiting. Her expression was a mixture of exhaustion and triumph, but there was something else in her eyes, something that told Jensen the fight was far from over. "Captain," Kane said as he approached, "we've secured the colony. The Zorkath are gone for now, but we've learned something important. We've seen how strong humanity is when pushed to the edge. But the galaxy is full of threats we don't understand." Jensen nodded. "I know. We're not out of danger yet." "Exactly. But now we have something the Zorkath never counted on: unity." Kane's voice grew more determined. "The humans on this colony, and the ones back on Earth, we've learned to stand together. And together, we can face anything." Jensen took a deep breath. He had seen the horrors of war, the sacrifices made, but he had also seen the strength of his people. The fight with the Zorkath was over, but the battle for humanity's future in the galaxy had only just begun. As the colony began its slow process of recovery, the news spread throughout the galaxy. Humanity had won, and the message was clear: the Zorkath were not the only species with the power to fight back. The galaxy would soon learn that the humans had no intention of simply being pushed around anymore. They were warriors, survivors, and they would never back down. The Zorkath had come to conquer, but they had underestimated the human spirit. Now, humanity stood tall, ready to take on whatever the galaxy had in store. "What's next for us?" Ellis asked, breaking through Jensen's thoughts. Jensen smiled, a tired but resolute look in his eyes. "Now we make sure that everyone knows. When it comes to humanity, the fight is just beginning. The Zorkath might have been defeated, but new challenges would rise. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and mysteries, and humanity would not back down. With the strength of unity, they would face whatever came next." The war was over, But the story of humanity's fight for their place in the galaxy was only just beginning. And the Zorkath had learned one crucial lesson. Humanity would always fight back, no matter the cost, no matter the enemy. The galaxy would never forget the day they tried to conquer Earth. It was the day they realized that, in the end, the true power of the galaxy was not in the strongest or the most advanced species. It was in the spirit of a human, determined to protect their home, no matter the odds. The Zorkath had been defeated, and humanity's